Hello and welcome to EZRA Asks, where each episode we here at EZRA invite in a leading thinker and special guest to help us grapple with an important and sometimes controversial question related to the world of work and professional development. My name is Sinead Keenan and I'm Chief Innovation Officer at EZRA. And in today's episode, we are going to be tackling the question, is it time for everybody to return to the office? And in exploring this question, we're going to touch on many more as well. Is hybrid really working? Who is it working for? What are the benefits of being in the office? If we were all back in the office, would our economy be booming? What's the trade-off between increased productivity and perhaps decreased innovation or collaboration? So many questions and what's on the horizon. And to help us answer some of these questions, we have the pleasure and privilege to be joined by a very special guest, the one and only Nick Caesar. Welcome, Nick, to the show.
Thanks, Sinead. Hi.
So, Nick, I'm going to have you introduce yourself in a second, but just for everybody listening, tuning in today, you are Head of Senior Leadership Development and the Coaching Centre of Expertise for NatWest, the Banking and Insurance Group. You're also a qualified professional coach and member of our EZRA Advisory Board. Previously, a researcher, a sustainability consultant, educator, and geographer. And I believe also a winter open water swimming enthusiast. Is there anything you can't do, Nick Caesar?
I can probably do more than those things and do them all badly equally.
Well, with all of that great expertise and experience, can you help us understand what brought you here today to help us answer this question?
Yeah, so I'm just a really curious person. I love learning, and I'm mostly curious about helping people realize their potential, not just people, but teams, organizations, communities. And of course, you know, this particular scenario we're talking about has been somewhat forced upon us because of the pandemic. And I'm just really curious about exploring that topic with you, and, you know, seeing what sense we can make out of it, because it's very live right now.
Absolutely. And before we jump into that, we're going to get right into that in a moment. As you know, Nick, at EZRA, we talk about coaching being a superpower, and it helps individuals to unlock their own superpowers. So having heard your experiences, I'd love to know, what is Nick Caesar's superpower?
I've probably already said it, and you can probably already hear it. It's my passion for learning. I'm just really, really interested in learning. But not only that, I'm really interested in helping people learn. And there's something for me when you help someone learn, particularly those eureka moments, and you can see it in their eyes, that kind of firing that goes on. And I find that quite addictive. And so it's got this lovely kind of positive feedback loop. And I actually discovered that through another hobby, which was teaching scuba diving, which is something I did for many years. But yeah, I got hooked on it then.
So it does all connect, actually, the swimming, scuba diving,
And of course, the geography.
and the geography, the love of learning. Yeah. Wonderful. So a few just quick fire questions to warm us up today. Going to put you on the spot here. Nick does not know what these questions are. So here we go. Nick, are you more of a morning or evening person?
Morning, definitely.
Morning, definitely. Good. Tea, coffee, or something else?
Coffee, black, 1 sugar, please.
What would you say is your favourite season of the year?
I've started to really enjoy autumn. I think it's a really interesting metaphor for laying things down before the winter in order to bear fruits in the spring.
Wow. That's a very cerebral response, but I love it.
And spontaneous, because I didn't know the question.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's probably going to be my best answer.
Yeah, I think so. Would you describe yourself as a thinker or as a doer?
I have an unusual kind of psychometric profile, which I bounce from theory to action and back very quickly. I'm not a reflector. So I actually think, do a lot.
Yeah.
So I do both in equal measure, but without too much reflection, which, you know, can result in the odd mistake.
Great self-awareness there. So thinker, doer, bouncing back and forth. Here's a tricky one. Would you rather be described as a great person or an influential leader?
I need to think about what the difference is. Influential leader, I believe.
Influential leader. Okay,
Yeah.
if you had to choose. And last one. Would you rather go back to the office 5 days a week forever or never go back again?
This is very personal, okay? I would go back 5 days.
You would go back 5 days, yeah.
And there's a couple of reasons for that, but one is my psychological makeup. I really enjoy being with people and being around people. The second thing is I have a really lovely commute. I cycle to work through woodland, which is, amazing. So there's a couple. So for me personally, it's 5 days back in.
Okay, wonderful. So that leads us really into our big question for today, which is it time for people to return to the office? And this is feeling very topical, actually. You might have seen in the last few weeks, we've had quite a lot of noise again on this topic. So we've had news about EY, and they're now monitoring turnstile access as they look to increase their people returning to office. We have the CEO of L'Oreal at Davos talking about how he thinks the remote working is impacting people's well-being, productivity. We have some studies coming out which are showing interesting findings in terms of RTO, or return to office mandates. So on the one hand, we're seeing it boosting diversity, it allowing more access for various people. And on the other hand, there's a question about what is the impact on financial return of bringing everybody back. So there is a lot of scrutiny, I think, again on this question. And just to hear from you, I think, Nick, would be interesting for everybody, just to understand your personal journey, sort of going between offices and home. And it sounds like you have a lovely commute, which is wonderful. But what's been your journey of the last few years as we've all been kind of going through this together?
So the personal journey was, probably shared by many people, I think. And I think I'm going to sound a bit sad when I respond to this. Not sad in an unhappy way, sad in a slightly pathetic way. So look, I'm a reformed management consultant, and I've been really very used to working on the road, out of a briefcase, and in temporary teams. So I think initially I would have thought working from home would have been okay, and I would have been okay with that. But actually, I really struggled. I struggled with it being an imposition on me. I think that kind of lack of autonomy was the first thing that really hit me.
Yep.
So that was a real pandemic context. But then it forced me to acknowledge how many of my needs are met through my work. And it's an awful lot. That's the sad bit, the sort of slightly pathetic sad bit. So, my social life, my relationships, my sense of community, my sense of purpose, belonging, friendships, all of that was all wrapped up in my work. And so I had to almost break all of that down and figure out how to get those needs met in a different way. So I got very inventive. I took up loads of new hobbies that were allowable at the time. So from sailing to running to church bell ringing.
Because you do?
As you do. And tennis. And I even set up a walking club, which was all socially distanced walking, called Rambling On. And that is how I got to know a guy called Nick Goldberg from EZRA. So he joined the Rambling On walking club.
Is Rambling On still rambling on?
No, it's not. People felt there was less need for it after the pandemic. I mean, I ramble occasionally with one or two, but not as a club. No.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, and that is definitely an impressive array of hobbies I think to have taken up. So now if we look back at that time, I suppose a couple of years ago, and in your role, Nick, you were thinking about. And I know you shared this with me previously. How do we introduce some kind of model to help our leaders and people understand how to navigate hybrid? Would love to know, and I think people would be really interested to hear a little bit more about that model. What have you learned? What did you get wrong? Would be great to hear about that.
Yeah, I think just before I go into the model, I think what I might just do is answer because you talked about L'Oreal,
Yeah.
and because you talked about EY,
Mm.
there is a question, is there a kind of big overreaction happening at the moment? And should people be coming back to the office? So just to definitively answer that question, I think the answer is no. I think the real answer to that question is acknowledge we've had this enormous social experiment kind of conducted without our choosing. And we need to be assessing on an ongoing basis whether the way we've set up our kind of working patterns in our organizations is serving things like psychological safety, meaning, inclusion and belonging, career mobility, creative work, social binding and bonding, culture formation. All of these things are the things that organizations need to be thinking very carefully about. So the answer is don't come back, but make sure you're assessing how you're getting those sort of slightly less concrete thing, how you're assessing the quality of those things in your organization. So I was doing a course at INSEAD actually at the time in design thinking and creativity, and I thought I'd use some of that thinking to help my organization. And so it's really a pet project. And I have a team. So unfortunately for them, they're a bit of a petri dish for me as well. And all I did was create this thing called like a flexibility manager check-in for managers to work with each individual member of their team to take in like a wide variety of factors that started to creep up. And I think I start, as you can probably tell from a bit of a phenomenological perspective, like how's it affecting me? What of that is my bias? What of that feels like something I should dig into? And what came out were there four main domains in my model anyway, which you need to consider when you're thinking about this kind of thing. And this is very much at the sort of individual level. So the first is the work domain. So what is the work? And how can it be done across time and space? So I think, this way of thinking about work isn't just about where, it's also about when. And so there's that element of work. There's also the element of work, which is how kind of new is somebody to that work, but we'll come on to that in a second. The second is the individual's character. And a bit like I was saying, what is their need for community? And what is their own career maturity? What are their kind of career ambitions? All those sorts of things. Then there's another domain called the circumstance domain, and this is about things like caring responsibilities. Do you have young children? Do you have elderly relatives? What's your role in the family? And what does that mean in terms of what suits you? And then finally, it's the capability domain, because one of the things I think the studies are showing is that learning is accelerated through co-location. And so when somebody's both new to an organization, but particularly new to a job, that getting up to speed and the kind of tacit learning that goes on is reduced. So essentially, you put all of those into a mixer, and it comes out with a particular profile for every member of your team. So that would be the first step of using the model, and the second is to have a team conversation about that, and then start to structure. When are we together? When do we need to work synchronously, i.e. the stuff that's done during work time, and what can we push out to meet everybody's kind of personal, kind of individual, flexible working demands. So there you go, long answer.
No, I mean, it's fascinating, and it's definitely one of the more, I think, considered takes that I've seen on hybrid. What strikes me though is you must encounter all sorts of trade-offs, because if you put together those 4 to 5 different domains, it's not going to line up neatly for everybody, right? You must have some people who are unhappy with where you land with this.
I think you will in the short term, and then ultimately in the long term, people will find the jobs that suit their needs. I think we often do get attracted to jobs that are aligned with our character anyway, so there is some overlap. But I think lots of organisations, certainly my organisation, has taken the view that there are certain roles that have to be what we call office first. There are others that are remote first, you know, and there are others that are more of a mix. And that's the kind of, you know, you can't really negotiate that. So if it's a complex client-facing job, you know, you can't do that from home. If it's a kind of regulated role that needs to be in a certain environment, you can't do that from home. So I think over time you would just literally move to jobs that were more suitable. But yeah, in the short term, I agree.
Yeah, yeah. The other interesting thing that I was thinking about as you were talking there was, you know, you can imagine that there are lots of organizations right now who have, over the last 3 years, give or take, they have had the people largely working from home, enjoying the benefits, the flexibility, getting to pick their kids up, getting to go to the gym, all of that, feeling engaged, feeling like they're being quite productive. And now you want to bring people back to the office for whatever reason that might be. It might be senior leadership just have a strong perspective on this. It might be that we see value for other reasons. But how do you, that is such a difficult thing to do. How do you convince people? How do you build credibility that now is indeed the right time to bring everybody back when seemingly everything is going really well otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess the short answer is you've got to be really, really good at change management here. It's a really good point because again, looking at the research, you know, there's an economic benefit for individuals as well. So if we just talk about the hard facts of money, you know, it's roughly, you know, the equivalent of about just under £2,000 a year in employee benefit, you know, or sort of around 8% of the median wage. So for people particularly new early on in their career, that's a bigger chunk of their salary than the people possibly making the decisions. So the first thing I think you have to consider as an organization is this is going to actually cost people, really. It's going to hit them in the wallet. So regardless of engagement or anything like that, there's a financial pinch that people are going to feel, and you need to think about how you're going to manage that. I think I would always recommend carrots over sticks. And we have to be honest with ourselves. The office was not a productive place before the pandemic. We're kind of kidding ourselves if we think it was. You know, there was all sorts of game playing that went on then. The open plan office was never a particularly great idea for doing deep work, at least. And so, you know, I'm a big fan of what's called the hotelification of the office, which sounds like a Red Hot Chili Peppers song. But it's the idea, you know, if you know, let's take, you know, the sort of budget hotels that are really good. They go, right, if you're going to go and stay in a hotel, our sheets are going to be whiter and crisper than you'll ever get at home. The shower pressure is going to be stronger, and it's going to be, you know, and reach the right temperature. We're just going to get these things right. So you have to create an office environment where it is just that bit better than being at home and offers you a bit more. And some of that is to do with location. So some of these big out-of-town places are struggling. Out-of-town office spaces. I know GSK, for example, are closing down in West London and coming into the centre, and we're seeing quite a lot of that. So you have to have a property strategy that is about destination and hotelification, and that's the way to get people back in. And then maybe if you start to encourage, you know, 2 days a week or whatever it is you want to say, there's that side of it. I think what's been more successful is organisations that got on top of this immediately rather than let this run for a long time and then reverse position. So one very big technology firm we all know about brought in the idea of Monday to Wednesday, everybody is in the office because we're a creative organisation and we care about creating experiences and rituals that give us meaning and reinforce our culture. On Thursday, you can work from anywhere, but it's no meetings allowed. So that's the deep work day. And on Friday, you can kind of do what you like. But that requires quite a lot of office space to do that. But they're very clear. We're a creative organisation. That's how we generate value. And to be creative, we need you to be together. So that really explicit rationale, I think if an organization is going to reverse position, having that really clear, this is how we create value, that requires co-location. And in fact, it requires your teams to be together on specific days. What really doesn't work is saying come back 2 days a week, but any days you like. There's no benefit in that for the organization or really the employee. And that would be the wrong road to go down.
I think it's such a great point. And you can see it from the credibility of how you communicate these things, right? So that the contrast between it feeling slightly tokenistic, any 2 days, come back, you think, why am I here? I could be at home, there's nobody in the office, whatever it might be. Versus what I think is a really great piece of advice there, which is think about how is this tied to organizational value? How do you create value? And be very deliberate in that rationale and in how you communicate it back to people. So I love that point.
Yeah, I think some of the bad practices we're seeing is because the leaders of the organization probably do need to be in because they're having quite a lot of productive conflict, making difficult, complex decisions. We know in teams that are bigger than about 5, you definitely need to be in the room to do that kind of work. And they're then making the decision through their own eyes, and that's, I think, where the problem is.
Which leads me to another point, really. So you mentioned there are leaders who are in the office making decisions, seeing it through their perspective, and let's be honest, that is typically a slightly older generation. Typically, we're going to see that.
Yeah.
So if we move to talk about, I hasten to say it, but boomers and zoomers, the baby boom generation to Gen Z. And I'm cautious of stereotyping, and yet anecdotally we do seem to see some differences in terms of people's preferences and challenges, right? What's been your perspective on that?
Yeah, I've just got to be so careful not to bring my own biases or stereotype when answering that sort of generational point, because not to forget that as people are kind of getting to my dotage, my old age, you start to have different sorts of caring responsibilities and things as well. So there's other reasons to want flexible work at different stages in our life. I've made the economic point. Certainly earlier in your career, you're probably earning less. And you may have used the saving to change property, to move further out, to lock in. I think we call them sort of one-way or trapdoor decisions that you can't then go back on, and so then having to come back in is quite difficult. So I think that's one thing. The UK Hybrid Work Commission report does say that there is more support for working remotely from younger generations. But there's also broad agreement from all generations that learning and collaboration is negatively impacted by remote working. And it struck me, for example, talking to graduates that we were bringing into the organization during the pandemic, that the ones that really flourished were the ones that shared a home together. So the graduates that were sort of in a house share, so they still got the kind of social side, and they were able to, if we might have a graduate in risk and a graduate in HR and a graduate in sales, and they'd be able to share their experiences of the organization. So, but that was coincidental, that we had some that were sharing houses together, and they're the ones that still managed to learn and get that kind of cultural acclimatization during the pandemic, whereas we had some others that will have just taken longer. You know?
Yeah.
I think it's a bit like how the education system is lost. Like, we say a lot of kids have lost about 9 months of learning because of the pandemic. I think that's true for kind of graduates and people coming into organizations too.
So there's something about that sort of tacit learning, right? The stuff that you learn just from observing people, what you hear and see in meetings. I think another point, though, which just as you were speaking there, it struck me that we could simplify this too much, and we could be too reductionist and talk about generational differences, knowing there's so much variation within a given generation, and in particular this idea of job maturity. So depending on, you might be of an older generation, but you're brand new to a job, new to an organization, surely then there's a particular advantage for you being co-located with others.
Absolutely. I mean, that's actually sort of coming back to my model, if you like. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so you've got the character,
Yeah.
you've got the work domain, but particularly the capability domain. I think it's really
Mm-hmm.
important. You know, um, I think the thing that possibly organisations haven't spotted, or maybe they have,
Mm.
and it's just my naivety, is that fully remote organisations, I'm going to say GitLab, for example, or Spotify.
Yep.
I'm not even sure Spotify are fully remote, but
Mm.
what they do brilliantly is create meaningful experiences
Mm.
for their people. And that typically is a big budget getting everybody together in a very glamorous location for several
Mm-hmm.
days, mainly to have fun.
Yeah.
Mainly to have fun. And if you create fun experience,
Mm.
lots of familiarity, really deepen and strengthen those social bonds, that then gives you the kind of the oil, if you like, to
Mm.
kind of lubricate the ways of working when you're
Mm.
working remotely. And I'm not sure many organizations that are not remote first and weren't set up in that way have worked out they need to be investing an awful lot of money in creating memories and experiences and rituals to get that sense of identity, belonging, loyalty, pride, connection, community, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think ultimately what I keep coming back to is trust, right? So much of our day to day depends on having trust at the heart of it, and that is difficult to forge completely remotely. So there is something about having those opportunities to create deeper trust, create those bonds from which you can then work together in different arrangements more easily.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, trust. I think um, that's particularly true with teams. So
Mm.
I think the you know, we do a lot of team coaching where
Mm-hmm.
I work, and particularly large teams. I think working remotely is quite hard. Like teams of sort of 15, that sort of size. You know, trying to do sort of
Mm.
3-4 hour meetings. You know, the amount of multitasking that goes on, and you know that sort of thing. But I think potentially one to one, it working remotely has been quite good.
Mm.
So I used to be at a business school with an academic called Dr. Ghislaine Coulot, who did a lot of work on virtual teaming, and there's something about both telephone conversations, particularly telephone conversations that can really be quite intimate conversations
Mm.
that you don't manage to have in the office.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think also when we all started using Zoom, we started to see into each other's spare rooms and
Yep.
lives in an odd way. And, you know, cats kept coming across the screen and all that sort of stuff that allowed a bit more of our humanity
Yep.
to enter each other's lives. So I think one to one, the trust thing may
Mm.
be strengthened. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is why, you know, Ezra's coaching is very
Mm.
successful as well, you know, not wanting to kind of promote you, but yeah, but because that one-to-one sort of trust building
Yep.
really works.
Yep.
I think it just gets really hard as soon as you
Yep.
start to go to teams sort of more than about 5 people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We certainly see that there is something about the one-to-one connection where, even if you're on Zoom, Teams, whatever it might be, just being able to see into the whites of the eyes of that other person, you're just so much less likely to multitask, right? That you feel like they're holding you to account in some way.
Yeah.
It's a much stronger connection. Um, and you mentioned there about Spotify, and I think I think they still have their work from anywhere policy, which is it's all work. It's all about what you do, not where you go, not somewhere you go. Then we have Zoom, actually, somewhat ironically, who have asked people to come back to the office 2 days a week. With the CEO hinting that virtual meeting may hinder creativity. To your point just now. And then we've got, at the other extreme, we've got Adobe, who are fully remote, but bring people together for those moments that matter, right? So those kind of meaningful experiences that you just mentioned, Nick. So we have seen lots of different high-profile organizations going different ways, and that battle between the benefits of offering flexibility and the potential boost on engagement, productivity that you might see for workers being able to work from home, and yet the potential downfall of collaboration and innovation. So it seems like we're hitting on some sort of, there's a bit of a tension there, right? What are your thoughts on this? Have you observed something similar in your teams?
Um, I'm not entirely sure I have, and I fear I'm sort of slightly gonna repeat myself actually in a way, because I think there is a tension when it comes to learning, as we just said, and there is a tension when it comes to culture. I think there's a whole bunch of things we need to look out for around that. I think if innovation is where you believe you add value as an organization, you need a specific strategy about innovation that is separate from your strategy about engagement, but they mutually reinforce each other. You know, if you think of one as being a trade-off and the other, then I think that's just not the right way to think about it. You just need to be intentional. Where do I add value?
Yeah.
What's the working patterns and structure we need to create that value? But I think we're in danger of being in a place where lots of people are making throwaway comments like that and missing all of the nuance. But I probably am going to repeat myself. But the things you need to really worry about: psychological safety.
Yep.
Are people at work still getting meaning from their work, or have they gone off during the pandemic and started church bell ringing and creating side hustles? Because that's a loss. There's a loss there for an organization. How are we providing structure, clarity, and organizational alignment in this very kind of virtual space? So these are where I think the trade-offs are. That inclusion and belonging piece, I think is interesting. Nick Bloom talks really well on this sort of stuff, and how, I heard him talk about this idea that when you come into work, at least 10% of the people in the office need to look like you for you to feel welcome. So that needs quite a lot of intentionality to get that right. Otherwise, that could have a negative impact there. Back to the social binding and bonding kind of piece as well. So they're all the things to be intentional about. I think sort of labeling things like innovation, productivity, engagement at that high level, we just need to come down a category or two and then think about it for every organization specifically.
And probably if you're finding yourself having to make those kinds of trade-offs, you've arguably designed your hybrid strategy in the wrong way.
Yeah.
If it's coming to that, right?
Yeah. I think so.
And we also know that no matter, like you've put so much thought into this, Nick, and I can see that. And there will always be people who still won't be happy, right? With whatever, it's so difficult to get this right. Question for you: would you be prepared to lose top talent if they had fundamental issues with your hybrid policy?
I mean, you probably have to, don't you? Because top talent, part of the top talent has to be the top talent that's right for you. And if the hybrid policy isn't right, and you've got an issue of organizational fit, so if your strategy around hybrid is the strategy that's going to deliver value for your organization, and your top talent don't agree with your hybrid approach, that means they also don't agree with your strategy. So they're great people, I'm sure, but they're probably not right for your organization. So I think I'd take the hit.
You take the hit.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question for you. So we've talked about a lot of things today, but looking ahead. So if we reflect on the fact that we've had the Industrial Revolution, we've had the digital revolution, we've now got the hybrid revolution. What's next? What is on the horizon, do you think?
Is anyone going to say anything but AI in answer to this question?
What's AI? Nick, never heard of it.
Or generative AI, or whatever we're talking about. So look, I mean, I think everyone's head scratching around AI, particularly the large organizations, with different kind of risk tolerances. But whether you're playing with it directly or whether it's just being infused through the various service providers you already have, like Microsoft with their Copilot and so on, there is, this potential for a lot more support for what would typically be left brain tasks. And I think that's what's coming, is the ability to do left brain tasks really efficiently with the aid of AI. I think optimistically that means that uh, we can be more human
Yeah.
and use our relational and human capacities more. And to kind of misquote an HR director I had dinner with a couple of months ago, they said they were very service orientated organization. What they can see over time is what she said, a shift in the way their salary mass is distributed
Mm.
around the organization, away from the kind of, back office white collar type work, much more to frontline customer care
Interesting.
and that kind of high touch activity. So it could be that we all end up having much better customer experiences and much better human to human kind of
Mm.
relationships as a result of this. And I think that's a
Mm.
nice prediction. So I'll stick with that.
Wonderful. So, at the beginning of this episode, we posed the question, is it time for everyone to return to the office? Do you think we have answered that question today?
I think we have answered the question, but I also think we've helped our listeners think a bit harder about whether they should answer the question quite so definitively.
Agree. And thank you, Nick, so much for your time, your great insights, being such a wonderful guest. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And we'd love to hear what you think. Let us know your opinion, your thoughts. Is it time to return to the office? What's been working for you? You can share your thoughts in the comments below. And stay tuned for the next episode of EZRA Asks. Thank you.